All right, good evening. This is the December 1st, 2021 meeting of the Oyster River Cooperative School Board. Tonight, we're going to start the meeting with, we've got on the agenda, a public hearing on policy BHE. So I would invite for a motion to open the public hearing.
I'll make a motion to open the public hearing for policy BHE, school board use of email.
All right. A second from Tom. All those in favor? 7 in favor and the student rep in favor. So Denise will explain the changes that are proposed to BHE, and then there'll be an opportunity for anybody who wants to speak to or ask questions about the proposed changes, and then we'll, when everybody's had a chance to do that, we'll close the public hearing and move on with the rest of the agenda.
So the changes that are being proposed basically are to bring the policy in line with what the actual right to know law says. And the policy has been vetted by our district lawyer to make sure that it does that and that it complies with the law.
All right. So are there anybody who would like to speak to the policy or ask questions about the proposed changes? Comments from the board? All right. A motion to close the public hearing?
So moved.
Motion from Tom to close the public hearing. Second from Brian. All those in favor? 7 in favor, the student rep in favor. The public hearing is over. All right, so next is approval of the agenda. We have a motion to approve the agenda. Motion to approve the agenda from Brian, second from UC. Any adjustments or changes? All those in favor of the agenda? 7 in favor, the student rep in favor, the agenda is approved. So that brings us to public comment. We have 3 people signed up for public comment tonight, so we'll start with Zoe Selig.
Hello, my name is Zoe. I'm a junior at the high school, and I've been here since kindergarten. I've come up through Mohammed, and I'm also a student on the DEIJ committee. I want to urge you to approve the DEIJ coordinator position in this year's budget. This role is important for several reasons, but one that's most obvious to me is that my teachers need to be supported in their decisions in the classroom. As a student who's active in the JEDI group, I've had many teachers tell me they're avoiding giving lessons on subjects around racism, homophobia, and religion, even when those wouldn't be very controversial topics, because they're worried about going about it wrong and then coming into, uncomfortable territory. My teachers need to be supported and guided in giving these lessons, which are vital to helping me and my fellow classmates become successful adults. School is meant to help us become well-rounded individuals when we're older, and that includes knowing, what the social expectations are and how to go about, talking about these issues. So we need to be supported from our teachers and learn about the history around the subjects we might discuss. We need to be able to form relationships with all people, so we need to be educated in school starting young about issues relating to diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. Our teachers need a DEIJ coordinator to help us achieve this. Thank you so much for considering my remarks, and I urge you to approve the DEIJ coordinator position in the 2022 budget. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lauren Selig?
Good evening. I'm Lauren Selig. I am from Durham and the proud mom of Zoe, among other things. So I wrote my comments tonight so as not to completely mess up this time. Tonight's the 4th night of Hanukkah. A lot of Americans in particular focus on conflating this holiday with Christmas. It's not the same at all. It's a very different holiday. Hanukkah is really a story about a time of fighting for justice and also for the ability to educate our children. It was a time when people weren't allowed to educate their own children. One of the items on your agenda is about the possible addition of the DEIJ coordinator, and I support this position for many reasons, including the importance of helping educate our children and also our educators about what they don't know that they don't know. Our educators and staff are fabulous, hardworking, dedicated people. They are well-intentioned, but often misinformed about how to present certain topics to their students. For example, students are told to never use the N-word. That's a good lesson, but they're never told why. Teachers work hard to celebrate holidays, but sometimes they really don't understand the details and end up inadvertently sharing misinformation. Or they don't think about the impact of something such as making Father's Day gifts for the child who has two moms. We need to hire someone who can help teachers learn the most efficient and effective ways to understand other groups, how we all belong, and who can help us grow as a community towards better unity and towards a way to make the world better for everybody. So I really support this position. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, and Bruce Fenton.
Thank you. I don't think there's anything I could do to change your mind on masks. I could share data with you. I could talk about Florida and Texas. I could share dozens of papers from the Brownstone Institute and others. I don't think you'd listen to me, and I wouldn't blame you. I don't think we have anything in common at all. I don't think we see eye to eye. And what I'd like you to do is recognize that. You talk about diversity. You've talked about diversity at every single meeting for the last 4 meetings. You're not talking about the, this elephant in the room of the masks. You never even mentioned the masks. I mean, what about diversity of political opinions? What about people who disagree with your decision? You have vastly overstepped what you should be doing as school board members. It is not your role or your right to tell me as an adult what health decisions to make, or me as a parent what decisions to make about our son. We've made decisions about our son. The head of pediatric neurology sat us down one time and asked us, do we prefer bone paste, artificial paste, or the piece of the rib that they mix together in order to fuse the piece of his brain that they did on his brain surgery. So we had to make that decision. So we are capable of making a decision about whether he wears a mask. I'm a 49-year-old man. I'm a veteran. I've owned businesses. I've had tremendous failures and tremendous successes. I've lived all over the world. I'm capable of making my own health decisions. And when you talk about diversity of other opinions, think about what kind of community you have. You are having a community that is authoritarian. You are doing something that our elected officials haven't done. You're overreaching, and it's violent. Just at this last meeting, you were willing to have me thrown out by police. What kind of community is that? You talk about diversity, you worry about the community. You're willing to have me, a fellow parent, handcuffed and thrown out like a criminal because I won't wear a mask, which I believe is a political signal. And the reason I know that is because every single one of you goes out and interacts in places without masks. And many of you are not even wearing masks yourself. It's shameful and it's disgusting. And you should be absolutely ashamed of yourself. You've vastly overreached and you've gotten in over your head. And the results speak for themselves. Parents all around the country are furious at school boards. You've made it lifetime enemies of people like me who never even bothered to come before. You have more people going into homeschool than ever before. Our legislators are actually listening to us. They're trying to cut your budget and limit your power. And I'm going to support them every bit I can, because I view you as enemies. You've vastly overstepped your power, and you should change it. I wish one of you would have the courage to end this now, make a motion to end this insanity. Thank you.
All right, Dr. Morse, do we have any email public comment?
None tonight.
All right, thank you. So we'll move on to the minutes from the November 17th meeting. Denise?
I'll make a motion to approve the regular meeting minutes from November 17th.
Motion from Denise. Second from Tom. Additions, changes, Denise?
Yeah, I actually have two, but 1 second, will I get my agenda up? I mean, not the agenda, minutes, excuse me. All right, on page 2, under my comments, the name of the publication is The Mouth of the River. So just make that correction. And then on page 4, under the unanimous consent, it was, Dan actually voted in favor, and I was the person who abstained from the motion.
The second motion.
Okay, second motion, okay. Right, yeah, because it said Dan Klein abstaining, and it was actually me that abstained.
All right. UC?
Page 2, John Bromley. The first name John is Jon.
Also on page 4, where we're talking about the coaching policy, GEA, I have a note from Rebecca that she would like to clarify where she's talking about that, where she states that swimming had started, but alpine skiing and baseball had not. She'd like that to say swimming had started, alpine skiing would start on the 22nd, and all other sports officially start on the 29th. And then also on page 4, I just want to modify, to clarify the motions on the contracts. So we're not approving ORESPA and ORAA. It was to approve the ORESPA contract for 4 years as presented and to approve the ORAA contract for 4 years as presented. And then finally on the top of page 5, the motion, let's see, top of page 5, the motion was not to approve policy BHE. This was a motion to schedule the public hearing for tonight. So to schedule a public hearing on BHE for December 1st. Others? Brian?
Top of page 6, first paragraph, halfway through, it says Brian Cisneros stated the most conservative route would be no budget shifts, no yellow sheets, and waiting until spring. That was actually Al. That was not me.
Oh. Credit where credit is due. Others? All right, with those additions, corrections to the minutes, all those in favor? 7 in favor, and the student rep in favor of the minutes from November 17th are approved. Announcements, commendations, and comments from the district.
Good evening, David Goldsmith, Principal of Mohermet. I just wanted to take a moment to give you an update about our Year of the Artist. Amidst all of the things that are going on this year, we are working to continue our tradition of having a theme, a school-wide theme, that all of our students K through 4 interact with is as in enrichment ways beyond the curriculum that they're doing in the classrooms. This year's theme is Year of the Artist. In September, we started with a school-wide question of what is art? And we had students communicate with each other through a bulletin board that's in our main hallway that everyone passes on their way to and from lunch and breakfast and throughout the day. Students were writing their answers and drawing their answers on cards that went up on the board, and we had a lot of conversation about how expansive art is. In October, we focused on community art, making projects as a community, and all of our students made feathers in art class, actually, that went into the creation of these giant wings that were on the same bulletin board, and students were interacting with those for well over a month as a community art project. In November, we focused on how art can make change in the world, and throughout our lunches, we read some picture books about different artists or community experiences that impacted communities or the larger world through art. And in December, that we are now here, we're starting to focus on bookmaking, and so our students are going to be actually creating books. And they're going to be learning about many, many different styles of folded and pop-up and beautiful handmade books that they can then use at some point throughout the spring to communicate some of their learning. We're pretty excited about it, as always. It's a great opportunity for our kids to really reach beyond what they're doing in the classroom and have a whole community focus, and that's our focus this year, and I just wanted to give you an update. We have a great curriculum enrichment committee of teachers who are, working to create these ideas and then support everything that's happening, of course, in the art room, but art in music and art in PE, and throughout the day. It's fabulous. Yeah. Thoughts, questions on that? Awesome. Thanks.
Thank you.
Good evening, Misty Lowe from Mastway School. I just wanted to share a few things. I wanted to publicly thank a parent in the Mastway community who approached me and asked why Mastway didn't have a Gaga pit. Mohermit had one, and I know there's been some used in other schools and other parks, and Mastway did not have a Gaga pit, and this parent approached me, met with Jim Rizicki and I, spent his own time in labor, shopping, creating and building this beautiful structure that is now on our playground that our children are thoroughly enjoying. So I've learned a lot about Gaga. If you're interested, I'd be happy to share that with you. But I just wanted to shout out to Mr. Hale, who is a parent in the Mastway community, who, in my opinion, went above and beyond to create something that has supported our full school community. I also wanted to do a public shout out for Amy Leone. She is a speech pathologist at Mastway School. She has gone out of her way to create what is called We Deliver. I don't know if you are familiar with that, but you can look that up. Different school systems do it. Amy has built, or her father built, this beautiful mailbox. Not just a standard mailbox, but a traditional mailbox like you would see at the post office. She's created a school-wide directory. Every classroom has their own small mailbox and their own address, and all the students and staff are using this mailing system to communicate, connect. We're trying to be creative, find ways for our kids and our school community to continue connect while we're in this strange world we're living. So I just wanted to thank Amy Leone for all of her hard work to do that. And then lastly, Mastway has a student leadership group. It's an amazing thing that our school psychologists and our school counselor lead with our fourth grade students. Students give speeches to their classmates, and then there is a voting process. They talk about what good leadership is. And we have had an election, we have our leadership board. The kids are just quite amazing, very impressive, and that is another thing that really positively impacts our full school community. So that is our student leadership in fourth grade. So those are a few things that are happening at Mastway. Questions? Thank you. Have a good night.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving break. Kids are always a great reminder. One student reminded me Monday morning, it's finally, Mr. Richard, we have full weeks of school, because we joked that November is no school in November due to the amount of the days, so it's good to get some weeks in before the other break. I always like to take good ideas from other people, and we started actually the Bobcat of the Week at the middle school. I took that from the high school, and the last 3 staff members that we've recognized: Caroline Hurd, a 5th grade teacher; Loren Ramsdell, an English language arts teacher; and most recently, Joe Dunn, who was one of our Spanish teachers. And with this, they get a spoil in terms of they get a premium parking spot right in front of the middle school for Bobcat of the Week. We're also recognizing children. And lastly, we've also started our outdoor playground fundraiser in terms of the recital hall seats. So that's started up. It's been successful. We've always had a good amount of donors signing up for that, so I appreciate the community's support. And one thing I do want to share, I got some feedback from families in terms of if they didn't want to purchase a seat and would like to make a smaller donation, I'll put a message out to the community in regards to that. Of course, we'd appreciate any support people would be willing to give. Thank you.
How many days? Yeah, totally. How many days?
89. Who's counting, right?
Yeah.
We're really excited. The science teachers were packing up things today, and So we're really enthused. So we're in double digits now. So it's a reality. Thank you.
Good evening, Rebecca Noe, Oyster River High School. Really, I'm looking forward into what we're going to be planning on with the SALT team. The Student Athletic Leadership Team is planning a Winterfest, which I understand we have not been able to do for the last couple years, but they plan some very COVID-friendly activities. A lot of them will be outside, a lot of them will be inside, but it'll be kind of like a pep rally day, but a day that we can come together as a school community, which is, I know, one of the things a lot of the students mentioned during my interview process. How are we going to do this? And so the kids bringing that back, I think, is something we have to look forward to in December. So thank you. Any questions? Thank you.
Thanks. And from the board? Tom?
Just two things. I'd just like to congratulate Catherine Plort, who's a finalist for the special, I'm not sure its exact title, Special Educator Coordinator of the Year. I may have that wrong, but just to be on the panel, kind of discussing that, just the uniform praise that I heard, and just the tremendous support that you have from this district, and to see that my own perceptions, it just coincides with everybody else's perceptions of your extraordinary contributions to the district. So thank you. I also just wanted to announce that I will not be running for the seat of at-large in March. So that seat will be open, and I wanted to mention that tonight, so that if anybody's interested in that, they have some lead time to think about that. You know, I've totally enjoyed the 10 years I've been on the board, and I'd be happy to talk to anybody who's interested in running. There's a perception that it's like thankless work, and I've had people come up to me and say, gee, I so appreciate your being on the board, it's such thankless work. I'm saying, but you just thanked me, you know? And I think that's typical of the district, that it's a district that supports education, that supports teachers, that has supported the board, that supported the budget. So I'd be happy to talk to anybody. As you get older, you think you have all kinds of advice that people want. So I have some, people like to talk to me about it. I'd be happy to talk that, but that gives people lead time to think about it.
Yeah, I'll just say it's no surprise. I was just a fill-in for 1 year. The at-large seat that I filled in for returns to a 3-year term, so somebody can enjoy the full 3-year experience.
Mm-hmm. Anybody else? All right. We'll move on to district reports. So, Assistant Superintendent.
Good evening. I just wanted to let everybody know that next school board meeting, I will be doing a presentation on assessing and monitoring student growth. Academics will be the focus for this presentation, and then we will shift on a different school board day and talk school board evening and talk about SEL, and then we will talk about interventions. So the first in the 3-part series will be on academics, and that will be next school board meeting.
Thank you. Thank you. And Catherine?
Hi everyone, I'm here to provide you with an update on our metrics and then our SAS program that we continue to have going. So I had Wendy give you the set from last week and this week just so you could see the differences from last week to this week. So there are obviously increases. That's the big difference when you compare the new cases per 100,000, % positive. The transmission rate is unreliable data for this week, as you can see it. It's just how the data is pulled, and not all the data is submitted in some categories. So she has to take what's been submitted and work with those numbers. So, obviously we're in substantial transmission. Our current situation is 897.2 new cases per 100,000 for the past 14 days. We're at 11.5% positive rate. Transmission rate is around 1.0. ICU capacity continues to be 90+%. Our staffing capacity continues to be insufficient. Again, it's every day is touch and go. Are we able to run a building, run a classroom, run a team? The principals continue to be super diligent. We have not been able to increase our sub pool, so that is still something that we're trying to do, as well as hiring paraeducators. We have been able to hire a few that will be coming in, so we're making a little progress, but it's just not fast enough. But we're many districts are in the same situation. So, and then our contact tracing ability, it really is insufficient, and just in terms of the time it's taking. The other piece that plays into this is, and we're going to be sending a memo out to the community, but parents are not really letting us know right away when there's symptoms. They're sometimes waiting a few days, so that delays the contact tracing and makes it a little bit more troublesome. So that's impacting some of our ability as well. So we're going to just remind parents to please let us know as soon as there are symptoms. We did message the community before coming back from break that there are some local testing options, but we've learned, like the Fox Run Mall, for example, that was a great option, has really bottlenecked at this point. They are really trying to catch up with the gatherings that took place and people really needing to access testing right now. So there is a delay in the results. If you attempt to get a test and you can't, please call the school nurses. We will definitely schedule you in. We just want you to try and get a test first if you can. But we have some parents that have waited 4 days for results, and that's just too long for a student to be at a school that could be back in accessing their education if they're negative. So we really our goal is to keep as many kids in as often as we can. And so if the testing isn't accessible, we want to make sure that we're doing it. That's the whole goal of us being able to do that symptomatic testing. The SAS program was held today. We won't have those results until tomorrow, but the numbers continue to tick up a little bit. At each school, there was a couple added except for one of the buildings, and it was staff. So that actually is at a great time. So we'll be able to see sort of where our community stands after, a holiday break. And then, again, accessing that symptomatic testing is important as soon as there's symptoms. We continue to have enough rapid tests through the state. I am able to order those every month and go pick them up. And then we have the PCR tests provided by UNH. We have plenty of PCR tests. Those are definitely not going to be a problem. The rapid tests that were offered by the governor went away really fast. So those home test kits that families might be able to use if they're going to a family gathering or you're just concerned, because we don't accept home test kits, but those are really not accessible anymore for families. So those went like that. So again, reach out to us if you need support, and our school nurses will make sure that you get the support you need.
Just a question, did the vaccine clinic happen?
Yeah, so that's,
how did
yep.
that?
So the other date is the vaccine clinic. So it was really well run. Chris from McGregor, Chris Lemlin, he was leading that effort on the county side. And we ran the clinic from about 8 to 3-ish that day, about 331. I think that was the exact number, 331. And we know that we can streamline it a bit for the December 11th as a second shot, so we know that we can kind of tighten those hours up. I know that they are also looking at other things that they might be able to do. As you know, the state is looking at those booster blasts or whatever it's called. So he's looking at to see if there's a way that he can tie into that. It was well run. I have to say they did a great job. Our facilities department did an amazing job helping them set up and get everything in order. Suzanne coordinated a lot of the other pieces. I worked with getting staff there. Our school nurses participated. We had plenty of tables available, so we had 10 stations, so it was really fast for families, which was nice. There was really no waiting. I think it was a success in terms of how it went. What we learned, obviously, is that there are many families who are getting their second shot, their child's second shot this week. Like, they jumped on it right away. So it's be interesting to see, how the impact of that. of how many have been able to really get their child fully vaccinated before our next break. That'd be great.
Just a comment too, as far as the booster blast, all the appointments in the whole southern part of the state have already been exhausted. They have, if anyone wants to travel to Berlin or Colebrook or North Conway, there's still some openings up there.
Yeah, I think that's why they're trying to see if there's something they can do to, just because we know we're going to have the staff there that day. So is there another way that we can add into the clinic that we're doing? So we're waiting to hear more on that. That's just sort of latest news. But we're excited about it. It went, again, the indoor clinic was great. It didn't take any longer. It was pretty quick.
With numbers going up and staffing capacity as it is, I think it would be useful to talk about situations where a class or a building would go remote. Hopefully we don't need to go there. For example, at the middle school, with the outbreak on a team, though no evidence of in-school transmission, would a team go remote if the students were quarantined, but the staff were still able to teach?
Yes, you see, so what I was planning on doing as soon as she was done with her typical report is use that as the springboard for my report.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah, so Dr. Morse is going to talk a little bit about that. Yeah.
On our SAS testing, what percentage have been tested? I know you don't know this week, but in previous weeks, what have they been trending as far as positive tests you've been coming across?
We've only had 2 since it started.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So obviously under 1%, well under 1%.
Yeah, and so we didn't get to do it last week because we didn't have school on Wednesday.
Yeah.
So we missed a week there. That's where we started seeing the uptick in cases on our end around Friday before last Wednesday. So we might have picked up some of those Wednesday had we had SAS testing. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are after today.
Okay.
Yeah.
On December 11th, is that, if folks missed the previous shot clinic, can they get first shots on the 11th as well?
Yep, they'll be able to do their first shot.
First or second?
Yep. Yep, and we're going to message that. Suzanne will send that out once the clinic kind of is finalized. We'll resend all the information that parents need, and once McGregor is able to kind of finalize what shots can be offered that day, we'll make sure the community gets it and blast it out pretty widely.
Great.
Yeah, and the other thing is what we learned last time, which I think will be okay as well, is we did have other kids from other districts come. They were worried at first, but once we saw our numbers, they started allowing some of the other kids who just had heard about our clinic, and the parents stopped in, and we were able to do them as well. The other thing I wanted to mention, just in case families are also watching, but also for you to know, is that if you are in quarantine and you have, checked with your physician around, your vaccine, we will go out to your car and do the vaccine. So if you're not able to enter the school building because you're on quarantine, but you feel like you still want your child to get the shot, we can send a team out there. So somebody goes out to do the vaccine, and then we have one EMS provider that just stands out there for the 15 minutes to make sure there's no reaction. So we also did that at the last vaccine clinic successfully. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Oh,
You
I'll stay.
stay right there, Catherine, because we're going to go to my report, and it's going to piggyback your report, so I want you to be part of the dialogue.
Okay.
Move?
Yes.
All right, so first of all, I want to commend Catherine and Suzanne, because I was being grandfather last week in Maryland, and they kept me posted about what was happening in the district, and we had conversations throughout that 2 days, but they handled that situation perfectly. I really want to commend them publicly for that. Going back to UC's point, so what trips us into making a decision about whether a classroom or whether a team or whether a section of the high school would go remote. And it really boils down to 2 things. One is, do we have the staff healthy enough to be able to continue in-school education? So I would share with you that last week we were 1 faculty member shy of having to send the entire team home because we would not have had the capacity to educate the kids who are present. So you say, well, what's that magic number? There is no magic number. I want to make sure the community understands that every one of these situations is unique, and you're looking at it from the perspective of whether we have the educators or whether we have the students in place. So David and Misty have the advantage of self-contained classes, so it's relatively easy for us to be saying, okay, David, Misty, there's not enough kids in school, we have to go remote. When you get to the middle school, you have a structure around teams, and although that's not as good as self-contained classrooms, it's okay. We can see where the kids are, we can contact trace, and so as these issues evolve, they take multiple days, which is another factor in last week. It was a 2-day week. By the time that we had collected all the data, it was Tuesday. And so it made no sense to send the kids home at that point because they're already there. And then at the high school, you may recall we created a master schedule this year that offers some flexibility at the high school, but it's like whole grades flexibility. Remember, we created a master schedule for this year that's a 9-10 master schedule, 11-12 master schedule. So that all sounds good on paper, but the reality is at the middle school and high school, kids are crossing each other in the hallways, they're in elective courses together, and so it's not nearly as an easy a situation as it is the elementary school. So I just want to say to everyone who's listening, there is no standard metric for making this decision. It is about the situation we're in and whether we have the staffing to continue to educate the children in school, or whether the number of kids who are out is so significant that it's better for us just to go completely remote. And it's, so I'm getting those questions in email, and that's part of my motivation for tomorrow putting out a communication. You have a metric for when we would go completely out, but when it becomes a situation related to a classroom, a team, or a group of students or sports teams at the high school, we have to analyze that situation as it's occurring. So if last week was a full week of school, we would have shut down Globetrotters, because we are now at what's called a outbreak, which is, depending on which DHHS worker you talk to, is either 2 clusters of 3 or 3 clusters of 3. Last week we had 3 clusters of 3 at the middle school, so regardless of the definition, we were at outbreak stage. So now, we're getting emails from parents saying, well, my child's in quarantine, what can we do? And the answer is exactly what we said when we opened the school year. We made a decision collectively, as school board and administration, that we wanted our students in school, and so we put all of our resources toward keeping school open. And we've been incredibly successful from the opening of school to this very day of keeping school open. And every time that Catherine has given her report, she's talked about how vulnerable we are related to staffing. So, we were that close last week to having to do a remote learning experience with Globetrotters. But we made it through, and so what can we expect in the next few weeks? We can expect an uptick in positive cases because we're coming out of Thanksgiving holiday. We can expect an uptick in positive cases after Christmas. These are times when families are being social and they're meeting with each other, and although we'd love to think that everybody is being, particularly focused on making sure everybody's safe to the maximum degree, it's a social time, and it's unreasonable in our world of families getting together to expect that everybody will be so rigid and follow whatever rules are out there. They're with the families, they're with their loved ones, the guards go down, they enjoy each other's company, and we're going to have positive cases. Right now in the district, we have more positive cases and more quarantines than we ever have had since school opened, and I would argue probably since COVID started. I think a piece of that is just people being people. Now, this is going on 2 years now, and it's exhausting, and people want to be able to enjoy their loved ones, they want to be able to visit their loved ones, they want to be part of their social network, and Thanksgiving and Christmas are just open invitations to be social and be with your people. So realistically, I do not see, we might go down a little bit in this next week, but it'll go right back up because of the situation we're in. That would be a national trend, a state trend, and it will be a local trend. So my goal is the goal that we all shared at the beginning of the school year, try to keep our teachers in and our students in. And when and if we make a decision to go remote, I just want the board to know it's not the easy, oh yeah, let's just do that. It's, you know, have we got every resource we possibly can have in place to keep school open? And if we can't, then you'll obviously know as a board and the community will know. So for the people who are looking for some kind of scientific cut score and so forth, it doesn't work that way. It really is situational, and we monitor it, you know, carefully. As you know, you see these metrics every single week. We know what's going on in the schools, and we're trying desperately every week to maintain school in person. In terms of people who want remote learning like they had last week, that was another decision we made at the beginning of the school year. Our resources will be put to keeping kids and staff in the school setting. We have no resources to say we're going to do this remote learning experience. What we said at that point is we would provide what we have done in the past, which is giving parents the schoolwork that the children would be doing, and at the high school, you know, a very specific Schoology page for schoolwork, and at the middle school, a specific page. But what we need to understand is, in all of those cases, we're not replicating what happens in school. We're giving the best that we possibly can give in a situation where children are being quarantined. So I just wanted to share that. I don't know if Catherine, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that's the biggest, like our school nurses were talking about, you know, last week is sort of what's our threshold, and like the metric that you all approved last year, that was really guiding us around when do we pivot, when do we switch from hybrid to like those, and now the metric is really focused on when can we look at our layers of mitigation and pull some of those back. So the metric has shifted a bit, and so because our goal is keeping students in school, so we do have a little bit different view on that, but there is no threshold, and that's the hardest thing around when do you have to send a classroom or a team or a grade level remote, because it really is largely based on staffing capacity and what's sort of our percentage that we have out for a particular team.
And I did give Catherine and Suzanne a lot of kudos as I began this. I also should say the nurses at the middle school who were dealing with the outbreak, Cheryl and Mike, were phenomenal and have continued to be phenomenal to this day. So again, our nurses across the district, but in this particular circumstance where it fell on Cheryl and Mike's back, they did a fabulous job as well. Doing contact with parents and doing personal phone calls and helping parents through the situation.
And
you know, we probably have, I know we have over 100 children right now on quarantine, and maybe we've had, you know, 4 significant complaints about being in quarantine. Most of our parents have been understanding. They know it's not our fault that, you know, COVID has quarantined their child, or their child has become positive. And there's also the circumstance where people are so frustrated that, you know, they just let us know how angry they are. That also is part of this COVID experience. And, you know, we acknowledge that it's frustrating, and we acknowledge where we are. We try to explain the decisions we've made. And I would say that, you know, vast majority of parents this year have been very understanding.
I can imagine, when a child is quarantined, the first time that a family and parents would ride with it. I could also imagine increasing concern or frustration if there were multiple quarantines, particularly if the child were vaccinated. And I wonder if there's any conversation about can we ask whether a vaccination has occurred? We can't.
No.
It's really
for quarantine purposes, we certainly do that.
Oh.
So if a parent is able to produce that they are vaccinated, that does allow them to not be quarantined if they're fully vaccinated. Absolutely. We haven't had any parents deny letting us know that because they know that the benefit is their kid gets to stay in school, and they are fully vaccinated, so they have that extra layer of protection.
So do you see the possibility of sort of, 3 weeks out of 5 being quarantined because of multiple exposures? Because that's when it would start to,
We had that last year.
worry about the education.
Absolutely, yeah. We had a child, we had several children out last year for 21 days. Was that the right number?
Yeah, because if you have a household contact and you are not vaccinated, right now you're potentially out for 20 days. So it used to be closer to 21, but we do have those situations that are happening if you're unvaccinated. Mm-hmm. That
They're the
continues.
exception, just like they were last year. I mean, the normal right now is 10
Yeah.
Per incident.
per incident.
And so that's the problem, that as community transmission increases, that there may be multiple sequential quarantines.
Yeah, and I said to a parent this week that the statement I made in that letter where there was no community transmission would be awfully hard to support data-wise, because if you having this kind of outbreak
No
in the
school
school,
transmission.
we could identify the party, we could identify the youth hockey event, but once that has happened and a child who wasn't participating in those events came to school, that's the definition of community transmission. We can't say it didn't happen, we can't say it did. So I'll be more careful in how I structure that particular sentence, because I was pretty black and white, and there's gray there. But you're absolutely right, you see, a child could be impacted multiple times.
And so I guess the question that I'm leading to is, if there is sort of this sequential quarantining where they're missing a tremendous amount of school, does anything change, or do the teachers simply keep sending the assignments home
The
as
teachers
they
keep
always
on
have?
sending the assignments home because that's all they can do, because they have other kids in front of them.
Yeah, we've already had students out with 20-day quarantines at the different levels, and so there's different ways that that's being accomplished. So materials, let's just say you broke your leg or you had the flu, and teachers would send work home while you recovered, right? So that's still happening. Now we have Schoology, so work is being pushed out, but it's not going to be a live kind of experience. I am able to do some services remotely because of if you have a one-to-one kind of time with a special education teacher or even a group and the parent kind of agrees to that, we are running some of those special education services because they're isolated to a group or an individual within a teacher schedule that already exists. But so we are able to keep up with some of that. It just works on the coordination with the parent. So some things are still accessible. It's just not the whole classroom experience. We're just not able to, because our goal is keeping the classrooms open and running.
And I guess another reason to get vaccinated, so that doesn't
Exactly.
happen.
The message is,
yeah.
please get vaccinated, because it's the best preventative in terms of keeping your child healthy, but also keeping them in school.
Yeah, and that was exactly what I was going to say, is that now that the vaccine is available all the way down to kindergarten, all the children have that option, and that eliminates the necessity to quarantine if they were just obviously if they, but if they were just exposed, in a social
And in this
situation
particular
or whatever.
circumstance, we have to recognize that the parents didn't have that option in time.
Yes,
So
right.
some of the parents in this situation had the
Right.
first vaccination, but they haven't had the second.
Right, yeah.
The timing in this particular instance wasn't really conducive to being able to say, Catherine couldn't say to a child, they can stay in school because they've been vaccinated. 'Cause
Right.
We're not
But
there.
going forward, it's definitely the best option is to get vaccinated. It is impacting in so many ways. I know 2 people whose surgeries were canceled this week because there's no room in the hospital. So it's not just, hey, I'm doing what I want to do. It impacts everyone around you. So my little.
Brian?
If you were to send, say, the Globetrotters or any other group home as a whole, that's not in violation of any of the DOE.
Well, I mean, that's the other.
I think they're talking about the entire school.
Right, so the commissioner has been incredibly clear, he's not supportive of remote learning. Said it multiple times, in multiple ways. And, if we are doing remote learning, say the Globetrotter situation last week, we decided to go remote, I would just call him and say, we're going remote with this particular team. and he wouldn't be happy, but there's nothing in statute right now that stops us from doing that. He's trying to change the rules at the state board level, but that has not been approved by the state board yet.
But they wouldn't be penalized as far as hours?
No, because the vast majority of our kids would be in the school, and they would be getting the quality education that they got remotely, short of the human contact. So it would still, even if he said you can't count those kids, the rest of the district is being counted, so we meet state standard.
And the teachers are ready at the levels should they have to go remote at a classroom. And I know we talked about this earlier in their year, at a classroom or grade level, they have schedules established already. So if they have to pivot, the schedule's there. They will continue to do their hours. So they'll be similar to what high school and middle school looked like last year, and actually more at the elementary level. They've put a schedule together to get those hours in. So we do have that ready to go.
And I actually think, in the terms of, a classroom or a team, I think the commissioner would, maybe not support it, but would understand the situation you're in, because what choice do you have at that point? You're going to contaminate an entire school by not taking care of one group. So.
And it's been happening all over.
And if they
People
are quarantined, though, they're using Schoology?
Yep. No, if Globetrotters went home, we would do remote instruction to that team just like we did last year, because the teachers are available.
Well, I mean, the ones, not the Globetrotters, I guess, any kid that is home quarantined, they're getting their work through Schoology, or how are they?
5 through 12 now. 5 through 12 is getting a very typical workload that they would see in Schoology. The K through 4, it would be similar to what we did last year, where the teacher would go on, meet the students, they would get a lesson, an academic lesson, then they would go off, no, I'm not doing this right. David, go answer it. You answered it today so beautifully, because we had this conversation.
And I think you're talking about just the quarantine.
Just the quarantine kids.
In just when it's an individual child, one student in the class is quarantined at the elementary level, there's a folder in Schoology that gets open for them so that their student and the parents have access to the lists of work that would happen. And some of that is work that's on a device. Student has the device. It's also sometimes work that's up paper and pencil. Materials are given to that family as if, like it was described before, if you're out with a broken leg and you're out for a while with work, that work is done. We have a lot of work that can be done digitally, but there's also a tremendous positive impact to actually paper and pencil work at the elementary level. So it's a mix of that, and it depends on where they are in the week, in the year, the grade level as well.
Okay.
And every school has some sort of blocks of time in the schedule that if kids miss something, if they're really struggling, we have catch-up time with individual teachers or groups. So we know that through our Bobcat model, through the Flex model, through our MTSS schedule, we have blocks of time to also provide students who needed a little bit more support on some of these lessons that were taught that was, let's just say there's a video pushed out through Khan Academy, for example, but it was a struggle for the student. We know when the student comes back, we're going to spend some time catching them up. I think the only other thing to add to this is that at the beginning of the year, DHHS said they would continue to support schools mainly in clusters and outbreaks. It's completely on our own with the district, so they want to know clusters and outbreaks. They're helping to identify, are you a cluster, are you an outbreak? But then it's on your own. There's no recommendation. There's no, okay, we have X amount of kids out. Do you think we should go remote? Do you think we should try and contain this? It's your decision. So there are no recommendations coming from our public health division. So I think that's important for us to keep in mind. That's why it's so tricky, and that's why Dr. Morse talked about every unique situation and really evaluating that.
All right, thank you, Catherine.
Yeah.
Thank you, board members. We just wanted to make sure we had this discussion tonight because it's so current, and I'm done.
That's it?
Because I know we need to get the budget.
Sue, anything from the business administrator right now? Save it for later? Okay. All right, Olivia, student representative report.
So, hi. Not too much has happened since the last meeting because we had Thanksgiving break and stuff. But like Ms. Noe said, there's a lot of things being planned. Like Student Senate is currently working on a food drive, which is going on until December 17th, I believe. And then, like she said, SALT is also working on a winter thing. But that's all for, yeah. Any questions?
Thank you, Olivia.
Cool.
Thank you. Anything from Finance, Al?
No, we didn't meet.
Okay. All right, and we have no unanimous consent agenda, so we will dive into our discussion and action items. The first one is the 22-23 school year calendar.
So I would tell you right off the bat that the draft you have in front of you is still evolving. I sent it out to the faculty. I've been meeting with area superintendents, and pretty unanimous feedback I've gotten so far is, why is the February break not the end of February like it usually is? And I would let the board know, Michael and I have had this conversation, that I came into the superintendent meeting with February, where it traditionally is at the end of the month, and the 3 units that have voc schools, Dover, Rochester, and Somersworth, 2 of them came in with the week before, and so the dialogue ultimately ended up with the 3 CTE centers where we send nearly 70 kids, choosing the Maine in Massachusetts week, which is the 3rd week of February. And so, for me, it was an issue of, I can't let, our children, our CTE children, be out of school for 5 days. I would tell you that as the draft exists, it's already off 4 days, but that's because every school has a different start time and a different work year, and some of it is not reconcilable. But the issue of February right now is very much in the air. Michael asked me to reach out to the superintendents again to have the conversation. They've agreed, so we have a meeting next week to talk about February, and does it have to be in the Maine, Massachusetts slot. So historically, we've taken a unique slot, so our families can go on vacation at a far less expense for airfare and travel, and we're very cognizant of that. And we took quite a beating last year from families related to it because we were forced into the same situation. So I can't say I'm hopeful, but the conversation is happening next week. I'll be advocating to go back to our traditional week. I don't know that I'll succeed, but we'll revisit the conversation. And then the conversation really boils down to, are we willing to go to the traditional week and throw the education off of 60 CTE kids? And for me, as I said to the administrative team today, that's not tenable. I mean, our first priority is our students, and I recognize that it creates this incredible conflict inside the community, but our only choice at that point, if the other schools aren't willing to adjust, is to say, okay, we'll go it alone. And I just really super uncomfortable with that. So I just wanted to give the board an explanation of why that week is where it's at, and I will do everything I can next week to try to convince my colleagues to go to the end of February. Other feedback I got was pretty minor in comparison. We really wanted to open school in this upcoming year with 3 workshop days. What I was able to glean today from Suzanne and Sean was that the CTE centers really don't start up in that first week of school. Now, when I had this conversation with the superintendents, they were convinced it did, but Sean operates with all 3 of them, Sean Petrel, our employee, on the ELO side, and he said they really don't, Jim. And Suzanne validated that, and Becca validated that, because kids are in the building who would normally go to Dover. So I think what we could do is maintain the 3 days and then provide a special, we just maintain the 3 days. We wouldn't have to provide anything special, and we wouldn't be out of whack with Dover in terms of the CTE center. And then in terms of prominence, and this is just in numbers, not because I love Dover or Somersworth or Rochester more than I love the other one. It's really boils down to the vast majority of our students at the CTE level go to Dover. And so even if Dover was willing to switch, then I would feel more comfortable and we could provide. There's only, I think, Michael, was it 13 kids in total, Somersworth and Rochester they sent you?
I believe that's right.
Yeah. So, we would just provide a bus for those kids. The downside of that is if their peers are on vacation, will they go? And, that's always debatable. But I'm still working on it. So really for tonight, it's just really, there it is. This is where we are. We're still working on it. It's still a work in progress, and we're trying to get it to work better for our families than it looks right now.
I think that if we are put in the position of needing to decide between aligning that February break with Dover and aligning with most other districts in New Hampshire, it's really important for us to understand why the Dover School District felt so compelled to deviate from the state recommended calendar.
Yeah.
Do you have an early sense of why they came forward with that first option?
Yeah, I know why they did, because the other two centers were insisting it be that week, and so Dover was with me initially, and then they switched because the other two centers were insistent on the third week. So, we'll see how the conversation goes next week. I'm hopeful that, I'm hopeful we can move it, and then if we can't move it, then we have a tough decision to make.
Denise?
I'd like to bring up another subject, another possibility, and it really has to do with the work that I've been doing on the DEIJ committee and Zoe. And I realize that this didn't go out to the full board; it actually went out to the DEIJ committee. Put together a wonderful letter that was sort of just kind of different tips and ways to be more sensitive, but she also included a link to all the holidays and observances for various religions. And I started really thinking about it and was wondering if the board might consider the possibility of, the way I look at it is the Christian holiday that we obviously observe is Christmas, and considering the possibility of perhaps one day for each major religion, which, would be the Jewish, probably the Hindu, and the Islam. And for example, for Eid, I'm saying it wrong, I apologize, end of Ramadan, is a major, I know it's a major holiday for those who follow Islam. And, Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur, I'm not sure exactly, but just to consider possibility of taking one day, which I know would, complicate the schedule, but, I think it is a matter of really looking at this and saying, do we really want to be inclusive? Do we really want to consider this? So it's something to think about.
Yeah. I talked to, and I'll distribute that letter that Zoe wrote to the full board, because now you guys are kind of in a vacuum as this conversation comes up. So I'll send it out to you tomorrow. But I did ask Zoe tonight if I could send that out to the entire faculty. She did a fabulous job in terms of sensitivity. But the other thing that I did ask her, and I think this is a really good idea, is just to put that list of holidays, holy days, and celebrations on the back of our calendar, and have it there so we're acknowledging that there are other celebrations that go on and remembrances that go on for other religions. So I think that when you get the next draft, I'll put it in the back and you guys can react to that. I think that would be a very appropriate thing to do. I don't think we acknowledge that we celebrate any of them, but we acknowledge that they exist. And I think that would be a way of doing that. So I'll include that and we can have that conversation.
One small note is you have voting day as March 8th, 2023.
Really?
That is a Wednesday. So.
Well, it is a draft, Brian, but thanks for catching that.
Just thought I'd share.
Appreciate that. All right, so
All
that's
right.
it, Michael.
All right, so most of the rest of this agenda is all about the budget. So we had our workshop on November 18th where we discussed many aspects of both the revenue and expense side of things. Coming out of that, I think that Al and I had similar thoughts about how do we condense this down into a package that we can not have to work out all the details individually. And so Al and I wrote those up completely independently, not knowing that the other was working on them. And by the time I found out that Al had done that, it was time to get the materials out to all of you. So we just decided to give you both. So you've got final budget options, which is four ways of putting the budget together that includes both the expense and the revenue side in one place. And then there's the separate sheet, which has got a lot more in it, that is it's combinations of positions, cuts, and revenue to go there, to get there. And I guess my suggestion is to take a look at what Al put together first, because it is simpler and more concise. And if we don't settle on one of those, then there are some tools in the other sheet that we can use to reassemble a budget. So as chair of the finance committee, I'll turn it over to Al for.
So it's right. After the last meeting where we had like these huge piles of papers, it wasn't as bad as like what I've seen on Zoom with Brian's desk or with Sue's desk, but it was pretty bad. And I was sitting around at my table and I had like all of these sheets and I was trying to simplify it, really thinking to what Michael had said, to have a couple of options. And so I'll start with the assumptions. The first two were the finance committee, when we worked, we came up with $202,000 that were built within the Fund 10 that we said we could not use that and open up a window to put staffing in. I think the finance committee all agreed that those seemed like reasonable. The second is Jim came forward the next meeting and brought another $105 and $700 proposal forward. That was more controversial. I think Brian brought forward, and he was part of when we were doing the first list of cuts, essentially, and thought that we were too deep. And the other thing was that I think it was unassigned in various accounts, which was $50K we really couldn't count on. So I removed the $50K for unassigned in various accounts. And so that gave us $257,700 to work with. We can play with it. So you could do it on either side. You could do it on the expense side and tackle the Fund 10, or you could do it on the revenue side and attack it on the fund balance. And so my first one, I think, would be the most conservative, I think, which is you take all $257,000, you cut it from Fund 10, you shrink the Fund 10 down, and it would only require, and by the way, all of these four proposals all come in at 4.1% apportionment, so they all meet the goal. So again, in that case, since you've taken $257,000 out of Fund 10, you need less revenue to offset it. So that's the smallest fund balance that we could use. That came down to $642,300. It would not address any of the yellow sheets. It, in essence, would be Jim's budget that he gave you in that book. We, through all of this, really had come up with that we'd put one tutor on ESSER. I know it makes people nervous when we put things on ESSER, but it really is there for a reason. As long as we're conservative in how we use it, I think it's a good tool. So all of these use one tutor on ESSER. So if you did that, again, when we look at what's going to come with Health Trust, it's likely in the spring, and remember, you won't have to make a decision about where you actually use the funds until you get to the MS-24 in the fall. But it'll give you an opportunity when you come in the spring, especially with the rebate, to see kind of where you are and what you can tolerate, at which time you could come back and say, no, we think we could add these things. If you were going to do that, my suggestion would probably only be for the tutors. I think, those are sitting out there. In the spring, if you felt more comfortable, you could fund them. The second one I said was just put the tutors right into the budget. In that case, I still kept the cuts, so I pulled $157,500 out of Fund 10. I added the two tutors in there, and that meant that we'd have to use $742,000 of reserve funds. So a little bit more reserve funds, but we build the tutors into the budget. The third option, we step up from there, which is we add the 2 tutors in and the elementary math specialist in. I still cut $61,700 from Fund 10, and that would allow us, or we'd have to use $838,300 in reserve funds. Again, so we add 3 positions in, we add a little bit more on to that we use from funds. And again, then the last one, option 4, and by the way, in Let's Make a Deal, you only get 3 doors. I couldn't come down to 3. So number 4 is we included the fund the 2 tutors, we add the math specialist, and then we add the DEIJ position. The problem is that we only had, at least at this point, $61,700. So if we don't use the unassigned or various funds, we could only fund the DEIJ position fully, the full position for half a year. In order to fund the DEIJ position for the full year, you would have to use the $50,000 that Catherine has yet to tell us if it actually exists. In that case, we would either, at the half position, it's $257,700. All of that money is used in Fund 10 by positions, and we'd need $900,000 in emergency funds to offset. If she said that we could use the additional 50, then all $307,700,000 would be taken up in the Fund 10 balance by positions, and we would still need to use $900K in reserve funds. And so I tried to make it simple as just 4 straight options.
May I add now?
Sure.
So Catherine and I had the conversation, we were to report back to the board tonight. The $50,000 would come from the contracted service accounts. We have contracted services, and Catherine has identified an area in the contracted services where we do not need that contracted service in the upcoming school year.
So the only thing that I was kind of waiting for that to come in, because again, when you look at option 4, and that would be to Brian's point, which he said that we cut too deeply into like the student services. If now that we've identified and contracted services the 50K, you could, again, if you only funded the DEIJ half position, the cuts would, the gym's $105,700 wouldn't be so deep. You could still have that $50,000 and put that in towards some of the other cuts.
But the remaining contracted services that we have, at least my experience is those services are going, the price of those services are going up a lot.
I would just invite Catherine up. Yeah, Catherine, can you?
Aren't contracted services that we currently use and will continue to use, aren't those going up a lot in the next couple of years?
The percentages, you mean?
That's what it cost us, to have a, I don't know, what we use them for, PT, OT, or?
Yeah, actually Stratford Learning Center is who we coordinate mostly with. They do not go over 3% increase. What can go more is a placement could go as high as 5%. So when I met with Stratford Learning Center before I do my budget, and I have them project, and it's never, 3% is the highest it typically goes. So I budget for 3%. When I have, there was an agency I've had to work with a couple times, which that's where you're probably thinking of. It's very expensive. I avoid them at all costs because they are for profit. So Stratford Learning Center is usually able to meet most, if not all, of our needs when it comes to contracted services, except for a couple pocket items here and there. The other thing that has really improved our kind of contracted services model is we've really looked at what we can continue to do in-house. So for example, we have a special education teacher who is also certified as a teacher of the visually impaired. And so we've created time in her schedule to be able to do that consultation versus contracting that service out now. So we're also trying to tap people to say, you have some interests. What could we do to work on that certification or that area of interest in terms of training? And we support that, and then we have that person in-house. Yeah.
Instead of DEIJ for half a year, what would it cost to have a DEIJ consultant instead? consultant, somebody to consult with us on certain things, because
But we do that now with New Hampshire Listens. I'm sorry. Thank you, Dan. We do that right now with New Hampshire Listens, but they can't provide the kind of continuous work that we need right now. So as we were building our capacity, they were our absolute close partner. They've been guiding us through the last 5 years, but in truth, we've outgrown their capacity to support us. And that's what I would say to that, Brian,
Yes, Catherine, a question again. I'm sorry. We talked a bit about at the workshop about metrics around DEIJ, and I wonder if you could talk about the relationship between some special ed services and more effective DEIJ work, for lack of a better way of saying it. How does the relationship, for example, between mental health and feelings of belonging and inclusivity, how are you seeing those interact? And the reason I ask this is that it's true that you've put forward the 50,000 of contracted services towards this, but perhaps there would be a benefit to the special ed work that you're doing with the addition of this person.
Yeah, so in sort of the work that I do, this position would help meet our needs in a variety of ways. Like it would be a huge complement to the program, whether it's special education or social emotional learning. So that when we talk about the position, we tend to talk a lot about, and you and I talked about this around like race and racism. But there's all these other components that are pretty critical to this position that help enhance the other things we do with students. So typically, we do see some overlap between a student with a disability, a student who's struggling with mental health, a sense of belonging, like you said. They're dealing with feeling connected, and whether that relates to they have a disability, they're feeling like they don't have those connections based on who they identify as. That certainly has a direct relationship with the work that we do in special education, our school psychologists, our school counselors. All of that is certainly a huge connection. I think about the work that Felicia Sperry, Kim Felch, and John Webb are doing around social emotional learning, and this would be a huge integral part to that, to how are we providing a social emotional learning curriculum and program and supports and services in a way that is also meeting the needs of our populations of students that are really supposed to be positively benefited. The other thing I think about in the DEIJ position is it's really, you're talking about all students here, because in some way, we're thinking about how do we impact all students with this kind of model, and you have to impact all students. If we want to make an impact on our areas of disability, our areas of ethnicity, it takes a whole student approach, like with social emotional learning. You have to have a tier 1 curriculum program in order to impact all students, so that students who are struggling are part of a system that is trying to uplift them. It's the same model. Yeah. So it's not just focused on a cohort. We can't think of it that way. It's really focused on all students and making sure that the cohort of that we're trying to focus on is part of that whole student body and our faculty and staff.
I've been speaking with families, as everyone has, and I hear stories too of what we might not traditionally come first to mind for DEIJ. You hear stories of, a child who brings up God in a science class and is not, the perception is that it's not treated respectfully in response to that. Being bullied for not speaking in the right way or adhering to the same beliefs, whether it's around masking or, a pride parade or other things like that. So I'm not drawing a any kind of equivalence. I'm saying that these are the ideas of inclusivity and the chill that Zoe mentioned. It happens on the other side too, where we have families and students in our community who are worried to share more conservative views, perhaps, because again, as our nation is fragmenting, our teachers perhaps don't have the skills that they need. Finally, one of the bullet points in the religious inclusion document that really stood out to me was to be sure that a teacher shouldn't silence conversation about Christmas. Because that builds resentment for children who practice Christmas against those who don't practice Christmas. And that was, counterintuitive to me, and I could imagine a teacher coming in with the best of intentions, wanting to create an inclusive classroom, and so wanting to not talk about Christmas at all. And that's not, that's why we need a DEIJ person, so that there's not a silencing of any belief system.
How do you compare that, though, to a student who needs a writing interventionist? Because that is something they're going to need in college. That can make the difference between going to a low-level college or a high-level college. Same thing with library paraeducators. Foundational point of learning how to read is in elementary school. Those two options here are the same price as a DEIJ coordinator. This is measurable. This has real consequences for kids. Not that yours doesn't, but it's measurable. We can utilize it. And I have a hard time telling a kid, no, I'm sorry, we can't give you a writing interventionist, but we had a DEIJ coordinator that we did instead. It's just very difficult to sell to the average taxpayer who wants to see the kids student-facing help for their children. And it's not that I'm against, like I said before, I'm not against DEIJ. I just think we have more important positions on this list that we could fill before we go down that route. And I'm just saying it's not the right time. I would say next year we revisit it again, but I just don't see it in this budget, and I can't, even if we found the money, I still wouldn't support it, only because there's so much more on this list that I think is measurable. It is student-facing, that I think we get more out of, and we could actually measure the results a lot easier.
So I do think, Brian, we can measure this position. I thought a lot about that since you mentioned that in the last board meeting, because I was like, so how would we measure? And part of the discussions we had was, over the course of several years, was we were talking about concerns and issues we were having related to diversity, equity, inclusion, social justice. We have a baseline of that data now that exists. We have complaints that fall within those areas. We have, if you talk about an investigation, I was part of the amount of hours that, Jay and I worked on something together was a lot, and we are not experts in all of those areas. So there are pieces and components of expertise that is missing from that team. But we do have baseline data. We have baseline data on some current mental health issues that are related to students who are struggling with diversity, with equity, inclusion, and social justice. We already have all that. We also have good data on, right now, components of our social emotional learning curriculum that are impacting students in a positive way when they can look at how they, self-reflect and kind of all those components of, from early elementary all the way up through middle school, and those executive function skills, like all those components of a student understanding who they are and the way they think and the way they do things. But we definitely have baseline data now that we could then put in components of measurability to see how does this position impact not only individual students, but also whole classrooms. And the biggest thing for me is really looking at when I know we have issues around diversity, equity, inclusion. They're real. They're with us every day. And I know I don't have everything that's needed to make sure that we're managing all those situations correctly.
But in my position, I have to justify to a parent whose child may need a writing interventionist why a DEIJ coordinator is more important than their ability to improve the writing skills.
Yeah, and I'm not
Especially
arguing which one.
nowadays when,
Yeah,
because of kids spend way too much time gaming and everything else, they're losing out on writing skills and communication skills. And, you know, I don't want to see a kid who could get some help get it because we can, or not get it because, and I'm not trying to put down all the work you've all done, because I know you've done a lot of work, but, you know, this is the shiny thing on the shiny new car on the block right now, is the DEIJ coordinator that everybody wants. And I just think I have a hard time going to a parent who walks up to me on the street and questions me, why did you choose a DEIJ coordinator over a writing interventionist or a library paraeducator?
I have another good answer.
And I'm not saying that I'm against DEIJ.
Yeah.
I'm just saying I have to be able to fulfill that argument or make
Yeah,
that
it
argument.
is, and I fully support the interventionist tutors. Like you guys have heard me speak about, if you're not going to put your money there, then you're going to put your money back in my budget, right? So, but what I would say to you is that because a federal law exists around special education, the IDEA, you have to support $10 million in my budget. What we're asking for here is $100,000. So if you look at about 10 million is impacting 15% of our students, we're talking about 100,000 impacting 2,100 students. So I think that that's just the other component, is when you look at it, and when you're kind of in our shoes and kind of going through it every day, you really do recognize the need and the impact. And again, I fully support, it's hard for me because the interventionist tutors are also, there's a lot of data to support those.
Tom.
I support this position. I don't think it's defined specifically enough to, you know, I was trying to imagine somebody reading this position, and there's a couple things that stand out. One thing that's kind of vacillated between being called a coordinator and a director. You know, we've seen both of those terms, and it still seems more like a coordinator position, because a director would certainly have a budget. And I think somebody coming in would ask, do I have a budget? I'm a director. And I think based on our budget, the answer is no. You would not have a budget. Now, that's something I think we should think through. I mentioned this position to somebody else who's very knowledgeable about schools, and he said the person will ask, what authority do I have? And it's kind of murky here, what authority this person would have. He's got all kinds of collaborative obligations, but what kind of authority? And if you have authority, you have a budget, it would seem to me. But we haven't thought through that. I also think that the range, and I mentioned this last time, and the range of skill sets that you're asking for is really diverse. Because, I mean, you'd want to have, you know, some of the things that Catherine's talking about, I think, are very different than a skill set that looks at curricular diversity. I think that's a different skill set. So where is the primary need in this district for this position? Have we defined that? Because I think what we have here is a list of almost everything the person could do. And I think we should, and maybe just one final thing, and I think we owe it to the person coming in to be clear about what we want. This is a delicate position, and we want to not set the person up for failure by asking too much and not giving them resources, and by not being clear about what we want. So maybe those discussions have gone on, but I don't see it here. It seems diffuse. It seems unsupported in a way. So I'll just stop there.
Dan.
So, Brian, I share your concerns also. You know, I think at the end of the day, there's nothing, everything on these requests is good and beneficial to the district, okay? You know, I wrestle with the same sorts of questions you're asking. I appreciate Tom's clarity in sort of challenging how well we've thought out this position, the issue of whether it's a director or a coordinator. These are all important issues that need to be resolved before we start having interviews, before we even, you know, come up with a posting. Where I see it differently is I found the presentation by one of our high school teachers really compelling last meeting. And my takeaway from that is that when, Tom, you're asking these questions about what could this position do for the district, my takeaway was this work is going on. That there are individuals within our district, teachers in particular, who are taking on this work outside of their actual job descriptions. And that is placing a strain and a burden on them, distracting their energies away from what they would normally otherwise be doing. And I feel there's every reason to believe that this is a burden that will continue to increase almost exponentially. So to not have this need met in a formal way, and this is where I think a lot of your questions are really good ones, it really puts us at a disadvantage and really taxes our teachers. And I will just bring up, earlier this year, we took the somewhat unusual step of approving a letter to our teachers that supported them in the face of the challenges related to this bill passed by our legislature. This, to me, is a way that we substantiate that support. The numbers concern me. The sacrifices to make it work concern me. Not having clearer answers to, the role and how it functions concern me. But I think what concerns me most is not addressing the issue.
Denise.
And I want to say that I also appreciate, Michael, your work and your, I very much appreciate.
Yours too, Al.
This is way more detailed than
Yours too, Al.
I also appreciated yours, Al, but I do like the way it was laid out in terms of A, B, C, D, E possibilities. And looking it over, and for myself, I really think that perhaps a good compromise is the 50% DEIJ coordinator, meaning that we delay hiring someone until mid-year. And to me, what that does is I hear your concerns, Tom, about, it still seems like a little bit vague in terms of where we're heading with this. It would allow more time to really define the particular focus of the individual. It would just allow more opportunity to talk to our faculty, to talk to our, parents, staff, whoever, to really tease it out a little bit better, while still acknowledging that this is a very important position. We have to wait a little bit longer perhaps, but it is in the budget. And so for me, I really like the option D, which does include, because I do agree, Brian, about the math and writing interventionists, and option D does include those. It includes the math, the K-4 math, the science, all of those positions, but by only funding that 50%, it does perhaps save some of, if I'm reading it right, Catherine's, that other $50,000. So I think that that's a good compromise.
Just a moment. So a couple of comments. One, first related to the DEIJ position, since that's what we've spent a lot of time talking about so far. I agree with what Tom and Dan have said, that the job description that we have today is not done. We've talked a lot about through the budget process, which I think is good, because the budget process forces us to really, put our direction into dollars. We've talked about what we want out of that position in a number of different ways at the board level, and some of those things are reflected in the current job description, some of them are not, and it is already a very broad job description. So either way, if should the board decide to include the DEIJ position, I would follow up with a proposal that the board needs to approve that job description before it's posted. And whatever, if it's a half a year or a whole year or whatever, I think that we need to do some more work on that job description. And a process for getting there, it could be that we ask the superintendent's diversity equity committee to take another stab at it first, and then maybe do some workshop work in public forum. I'm not sure exactly what that would look like, but I think there's some work to do there on the job description. just to provide a little bit of context for the menu that I provided, I wanted to look at the positions separately from the revenue and expenses. And so that's why you see the A, B, C, D, E. What are some different options, different combinations of included positions based on the conversation that we had on November 18th. And then the second page is, okay, well, where do we get the money from? And those numbers don't line up exactly in most cases. So there still has to be an adjustment made, and Al did that by reducing the amount that comes out of the reserve funds, and that would be an easy way to just back down the total expense to whatever it needed to be based on what we picked for positions that we chose to include in the budget. So that was the thought process there. I do want to point out that the throw everything in which is option E on the top, works out to a 4.79% increase in apportionment if we didn't, even with the $900,000 coming out of reserve funds. So that's, in my opinion, that is far beyond what we should be looking at. But any of those other options are probably palatable to me. You see?
I wanted to address the options C or D, which is essentially the same in prioritizing the, the math and science specialists at the elementary school, the MTSS, writing intervention tutors, and the difference simply being whether it's the DEIJ person is funded at 50% or 100%. And Al, in your approach, the sense was that there was, $50,000 that hadn't been explained, or it hasn't been whether it was, number one, available, and number two, even a good use of special ed funding to put it towards this position. And I think what we've heard, we can ask clarifying questions, but is that both they are available, and Catherine believes that it would be an asset to the tier one, as well as the range of special ed support that she provides. So the money is there to by both Michael's and Al's pieces. And so the question is, why would a hire prior to the school year be more effective than a hire midway through the school year? And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. And then there's also the question of, can we move quickly enough to get the job description in the right shape and attract the right candidate? But in terms of the value of starting at the beginning of the school year, we are already, there's a clear need among teachers to have this professional development, and by having it in place at the start of the school year, we can begin to benefit immediately. And as Dan has mentioned previously, this this sense of accelerating change in the environment, the increasing divisiveness in our society, just going through on a timeline, May 2020, with George Floyd's murder, Black Lives Matter began to elevate. Later that year in September, President Trump signed the Divisive Concepts Bill. In January, that was revoked. But all through September, the fall, there was increasing attention on what was happening in schools, primarily because of remote versus in-school, right? The real difference is there, but it brought additional attention to the school. Communities started to sort of flex the muscles of antagonism in feeling like they needed to come forward. HB2 was signed into law this year. In June, the majority of the governor's diversity council resigned in protest. Last month, without alerting superintendents, the state set up a website to let parents and students turn in teachers they believe had violated the law. The Moms for Liberty New Hampshire chapter said they've got $500 for the person that first successfully catches a public school teacher breaking the law, putting a bounty forward. There is no reason to think that what is happening outside our district and the way that it is affecting us in the district is going to calm or slow or even hold steady. So the sooner that we can bring a person in to help us navigate this, there's the phrase, a fish doesn't know that it's wet. It's hard for those of us around the table, or even in the DEIJ committee, to come up with I would hesitate to have too specific a job description, because the person we bring in is going to have additional expertise of how to work and how's needed. I absolutely agree that we need to tighten the job description to have a stronger focus on the teacher support and all that, but the process of, we should not delay in order for those of us who are in this, around the table or in the system now, to get something perfect before we bring in the resources that we need for the community at large.
I'm sorry, I wasn't saying perfect. I think that you could have a position where the focus is curricular. That would be a different skill set. I think you're talking about working with teachers to have discussions about race. That would be, I think, a different kind of position, and it seems to me this is kind of encompassing all of that. And so I'm not asking for perfect. But I think that, and maybe Michael's thing is, well, if you go forward with it this year, we have to get their nose to the grindstone and say, what do we really want? Because I think if you wanted to say, we want to diversify our curriculum because our kids, the learning is too narrow in so many ways, or parts of history are not taught, I think that's different than some of the things we've been talking about. I think it's almost a different person than what we've been talking about. Now, maybe somebody has all these abilities, but I think we have to watch that we kind of, when we bring somebody in, we know what we want them to do. And so I don't think, so I'm not talking about perfect, but I'm thinking there has to be, it's too diffuse now, I think.
How long do you think that process would take?
Well, I would like to see what some other districts have done in terms of how they bring in people. I'd like to see some other descriptions of how people work. We haven't done that, I don't think.
Even the two that exist in New Hampshire right now, in Manchester and in Exeter area, are structured quite differently.
Actually, this job description is a modification of Exeter's.
This is more like, the way.
So I lifted theirs, and then I brought it to the GEI committee, and, it's like, so when you do things by committee, oh, wouldn't it be good to have this? Wouldn't it be good to have that? So I think, you're onto something, Tom. I think it just became like, oh, this position can do this, and this position can do that. So I do think it can be focused, but structurally, it's similar to Exeter's.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a quick clarifying question? In the 50% option for DEIJ, are we necessarily talking about delaying hiring a full-time position, or are we talking about a part-time position?
I mean, the way I'm understanding the conversation, and you guys can correct me if I'm misunderstanding it, is if it's a 50% position, we would begin at the halfway mark of the school year.
So we would delay hiring a full-time position?
I think that was the way it was discussed at the workship.
That's how
I structured it.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to, hold on, sorry.
Yeah.
I wanted to, Olivia and Al and Jim have not said much in this part of the conversation. I want to make sure that we're not shutting you out, so.
Okay. I'll let Olivia go.
Yep, we'll let Olivia
Well, you don't have to, but. Okay. All right, you say go ahead.
I was just quickly going to clarify, it was put forward as a DEIJ director. The reason that the title was, that we've been open to a different title, is if the funding weren't at director level position, then, would we think that it would be more of a specialist? So if it were approved, it doesn't mean necessarily that we spend the absolute maximum that was that was approved. But that's the reason that the name changed, because the thought that might be that it would not be approved at director level position.
So I can go. So I think, I tried to do what I thought was really my obligation on the finance committee, was to try to lay down what was possible, and met our goals. And so, again, yours gives a lot more options, but this is how I was kind of working it through in my mind. And I think I said last meeting that I thought that the time really is to do something significant. And as I looked particularly at the DEIJ, you know, my thought is that we haven't finished some of the work that needed to be done. I mean, the position we need in terms of just in the liability scares me so much. I hate to think in terms of money, but it's really frightening when you think about that. But, you know, I think that what we really needed is that, and I know the DEIJ committee is working on it, is like the community forum where we really begin to talk about where we are. And that hasn't occurred yet. And then I think about this position that there's not very many of them in the state of New Hampshire, and it's a real flashpoint position, and there's a real need for us to really be cautious and really think through what we're doing as we fill the position. And so, you know, when I looked at it, and it's somewhat ironic because I spent Mondays fighting so hard against doing what I'm exactly going to say to do. I actually think that the 50% one is the way to go. And the reason I think it is, it gives us, so it's essentially a year from now, which leaves us uncovered for the first half of the year, which really scares me to death. But it gives us the time to put in the work to make the position, give it the best probability of success. So that means we can have the community forums where we begin to talk about what are our issues at Oyster River. What do we think that this position would be like? It would satisfy, I think, a lot of the greatest fears that we've heard of what does this mean in terms of curriculum or how does this fit in? So it allows us to do all of that work first. It allows us then to also really clarify in terms of the position what we're thinking, what it means, what that means to the community, and really kind of have a process where we focus that in. It gives us then the time to begin to think of the hiring process itself. We'll have enough time to do it. And I think I'm hoping, gives the person that comes in, and it's likely to be someone from outside of our community, the best probability of success. So again, it's ironic because I cannot tell you how hard I fought against doing this very thing on Monday with other positions. But in this case, I think that we need to put in some more work. I believe it has to be in the next fiscal budget. I really do. But I think we have some work to do. We owe it to the person that's going to be the DEIJ person to come in, to put in the work, to pave the way, I hope, to make it the most successful possible. So I know that's not the best, and I know I've tried to compromise like crazy all over the place on the budget. I mean, I tried to make it a tutor position and everything else, but I think it really needs to be its own position. I just think that we need to put the work in first to make it successful. So I don't think that's what people may want to hear, but.
Brian, and then I've got some comments.
First of all, thank you, Michael. I could tell Michael wrote this just because I'm a visual learner, because I know this is your style.
I have to do the math, so I was going to do it for myself either way. And I didn't limit myself to what I thought was reasonable. I went to the extremes.
So you both have the same information, but in different formats. And for some, it's easier. But I do like the way you broke this out, Michael, in different options. It's been helpful. And I kind of remember what Tom said in their last meeting, which I think made a lot of sense, which this extra money we found, even the extra $50,000 from special ed, I'd like to see the writing interventionists, library paraeducators, I could go either way on, but any additional funds we have would be less we take out of emergency funding as far as any of the funds we have. Keep it still at 4.1%, but just not take as much out, which I believe, Tom, you had mentioned last meeting we had. I can't wrap my head around this DEIJ coordinator for this year. I could probably support it next year if what we're talking about happens, which is narrowing it down, really getting a good idea of what it's going to be, what it's going to entail. I'd like to see what the two other districts in the state are doing. I'd like to see a little more. To see what's good, like I always say, what's the good, the bad, the ugly. I want to see what's been successful and what hasn't before we really take this plunge, because I think it's a politically charged position, and I don't see it bringing people closer at this point. I think it would bring us apart a little before it brought us together. just because of where we are now. In the next year, there's going to be a lot going on, not to mention inflation is through the roof. People are still not going to even like that we're at 4.1% because they're paying more for gas, they're paying more for food. I have a lot of people in my town that are just getting by, and it's just not going to fly. So I have to really look out for their best interest. That's why they put me here, and that's why I'd be happy with Plan B that Michael has here, and whatever additional funding we have goes back. We just cut down on the reserve funds that we pull from. So that's my 2 cents.
I'm going to do some out loud processing here along.
Is B on yours, is that 3 on mine? Isn't that what that's right?
B?
You're trying to do a crosswalk.
Crosswalk it?
Yes.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
B and 3 are.
The difference is I didn't.
You only took 202.
I didn't try to reduce the reserve funds in that scenario.
Yeah.
Where that's the way you address the savings, but the expense side is the same. Yeah. So
You're going to go do like a summary piece each time? Do you want me to speak before you do that, or after?
no, go right ahead, and then I'll do my out loud processing.
So I deliberately was in listen mode tonight because it's really up to the 7 of you how it progresses. You know that my position is that I think this position is, the DEIJ position is desperately needed. You have, at least 22 people who've been meeting every other week in the evening or now 7 o'clock in the morning before school starts to keep this part of the strategic plan alive. And they have been working tirelessly because this body approved this work as part of the strategic plan, and part of that strategic plan was ultimately to hire someone who could carry this water. Catherine's talked about not having the expertise, but we have great heart. And quite honestly, we as a district have been ahead of the curve on this issue from the point that we adopted it in the strategic plan. And the fact that we're not number one in terms of hiring a DEIJ coordinator isn't necessarily important, but I think that we have to acknowledge at this table tonight that without a dedicated person, whether it's a half-time or full-time, without a dedicated person to do this work, you don't have the firepower to continue to implement the strategic plan that was approved. People are putting, and Dan said this as articulately as anybody, people are putting in enormous amount of time dedicated to this work because they believe in it, but we also are saying we absolutely need help. We need someone who can pick up and coordinate this work because we're doing it in a very heartfelt way, but it is absolutely hit or miss in terms of how it's impacting the district. And we talk about the support for the teachers, and that is absolutely true. And the other part of this is the support for our students. We cannot give you the examples, real life examples that we've dealt with since we've been doing this work for the last 5 years because it's too revealing as to the situation. They would tell you that our teachers desperately need the support and guidance from someone who is an expert in this field. And that's what Vivian was talking about. If the job description is too much, the heart of this thing is how do we support our teachers in a difficult time, carrying on a difficult conversation, which is hard to have if you're not black, brown, if you're not gay, if you're not gender fluid, if you're not. These are the things that, we, with all good intentions, are working our way through, but we're not experts. And it's not because we don't want to do the work, it's because we want to do the work right. And so, as you're having this conversation, obviously I respect whatever decision the board makes, but we desperately need to get this position going because we have people who've put their heart and soul into this work because you guys blessed it as part of the strategic plan, and they've been moving forward with all good intentions. But we need somebody who is an expert in this field to guide the work. So that's all I didn't need to say that I support it because I've said that many, many times. I just wanted to reiterate why I think it's necessary.
Thank you, Dr. Morse.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to go through and just my thought process with the proposed positions, because we haven't really talked through all of them in great detail, and there are some that I think it's worth at least touching on a rationale as to why we would or wouldn't include them. Most of these proposals include the K-4 math science specialist position. That was one that I will admit that I didn't fully understand, but I know that both of our elementary principals are very much behind that as a top priority, and that the person who's doing that position today is both doing an excellent job and flat out in that role. I think we've talked extensively about the tutoring positions, both the MTSS intervention specialist at the middle school and the writing interventionist at the high school, and most of these proposals find ways to include all three of those as well, even if one of them is remaining under ESSER funds. Those are direct student contact positions. They were created as part of essentially academic recovery, using the ESSER funds that were intended to support students where there was learning loss coming out of the pandemic. We're still talking about the DEIJ coordinator position. The next one that was in the top tier as proposed by the administration was elementary world language, and I don't think we're ready for that yet. And we haven't discussed it in great detail, although David and Misty did talk about what the logistics of that might look like at our workshop on the 18th. I agree with something that Tom has said several times, that to do that right and fit it into the elementary school day probably means a longer school day. And that's not something we can do rapidly. That's going to take some ongoing work to get there. And there are exactly how do we answer the questions about which languages or one language only, which one do we select? We haven't found our center on that yet. I think I was the only one that spoke in favor of the drug and alcohol counselor position at the high school. And so I understand that that's perhaps not the top priority for next year. What I would like to suggest is that we take a look at what data we can collect on utilization of the contracted service position for what we do have access to. I noticed that it's on the writing on the stall in the high school bathrooms, reference to the resource that's available now. And so understanding how we utilize that and the level of need there for future consideration, I think is important. And the high school science teacher, the half-time high school science teacher, kind of falls into the same boat. We know that we have some classes that are oversubscribed, and that would provide some relief in the high school science department. It's not an existing position. It would be growth there. So that's something I know that we'll take a look at. That the administrative team at the high school takes a look at constantly. Communication coordinator for the district, increasing that to a full-time position. I don't think that's necessary to include in the budget. We're still working on getting the results from the community survey on communications. We still have $50,000 in the budget as proposed for either for that position or for a contracted service type position. So I think we'll be able to address recommendations that come out of the survey with those funds that are already in the budget. And then the library paraeducator positions, I think it's really important to note that these are not positions that were eliminated from the budget in the past. These are positions that were reallocated to other parts of Mohammed and Mastway during the pandemic. And I know Mr. Goldsmith has said pretty clearly that at Mohammed, that building para is spending the vast majority of their time supporting the library. I believe the same is true at Mastway. Misty's nodding her head, yes. And so while there is a little bit less direct library support than there was pre-pandemic, most of it is still there. And I think we can continue to look at other ways to support the libraries that probably is not going to fit into the budget this year. So that's my take on where we're at with those other positions. I thought it was worth giving some airtime to the tier 2 and tier 3 things that were in the initial proposals.
Can I make a motion?
Sure.
I would like to make a motion to approve option D that was presented on Michael's communication, which includes, I'll read the entire list, the elementary kindergarten teacher and the 2 Mandarin teachers, which are both currently in this year's budget. In addition, 2 Oyster River Middle School custodians, the K through 4 math and /science specialist, the MTSS and writing intervention, those are 2, and then the DEIJ coordinator position at 50%, which means delaying hiring of a full-time coordinator until mid-year.
So we have a motion. We have a second?
I'll second
We
this.
have a motion from Denise for option D and a second from Al. I think, do we want to take the positions separate from the revenue? Because the other half of that.
That's the same thing. It's like, so you've listed the expenses.
Right.
Do you want to do the expenses first and then do the revenue?
It doesn't matter to me. I thought maybe where we focus so much of our discussion so far on this, it might be best to deal with this and then to talk more specifically about how we get there. But I mean,
For sure. I think the harder part is the expenses than ironically enough, than the revenue, so I think it's fine.
All right, so we have a motion for, to include the positions that were added post-budget essentially for this year, the elementary kindergarten teacher, Mandarin teachers at the middle school and high school, custodians for the new middle school, which were already included in the baseline budget. In addition to K-4 math and science specialists, funding 2 of the MTSS or writing intervention in our budget, with one would still be in the ESSER grant, and funding the DEIJ coordinator at 50% for the 22-23 school year. Discussion on this motion?
One more thing to say, though I understand that most folks have their minds made up. In our DEIJ committee, New Hampshire Listens brought forward the concept of moving at the speed of trust, so not too fast, but not moving at the pace of privilege, which is too slow. It takes those in a position of privilege, of being able to set timelines, to make decisions, to have power, and forgets that every day other people are being affected, maybe even harmed. And so I just ask before the vote that you recall Dr. Morse's description of this as technology, where teachers are trying to do their best and moving forward in the best ways that they know how, in non-standard and in a range of different skills. And the emotional and time burden that places on administrators, as well as the effect that it has on students. 6 months is not only benefit in terms of tightening the job description. 6 months, or however long the delay is 6 months without this support and the results that we need to be open to and not simply be moving at a pace of privilege.
Question. Dr. Morse, if the DEIJ position were approved at 50% as it is in the motion, what date would you predict that person would begin work?
Well, the way that I'm understanding this, the person would take the position literally halfway through the school year, halfway through the contract year. So most likely it would be January. But I mean, I can get that more fine-tuned, but likely it's in the January range. The mid of the school year is about January 21st or something like that. So someplace in that space, Dan.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, if we are assuming it, I don't know, and again, that has to be teased out, but if it was a 12-month position, it would start July 1st, which, in terms of the budget, you could, but somewhere, I totally agree, like somewhere in that range.
Olivia.
I just have a quick question. So what we have currently, is it like a consultation type thing? And would that still be available in the 6 months when we don't have the coordinator position?
Yes, Olivia, I think that we would keep our relationship with New Hampshire Listens because they've been an incredible support for us, and then we would transition to this position.
Okay, thank you.
Any further discussion? All those in favor of the motion to adopt option D in terms of the positions added to the budget, please raise your hands. 3 in favor, and the student rep in favor. All those opposed? 4 opposed. That motion fails. Do we want to try again?
Yeah, can we raise the hands, because I think that we both need to get it down in writing.
So in favor was Tom, Denise, and Al.
Okay.
And Olivia. And opposed was Dan, UC, Michael, and Brian. I'm going to suggest that we take a 5-minute recess and come back and continue to try to finish this.
Thanks.
It's going to be like already.
I don't think I've mentioned how sick
All right, we're back. So,
I'd like to make a motion if whenever is appropriate.
Okay.
I'd like to make a motion that we accept option C. If you'd like, I can read it, or you can, Michael?
Is that on Michael's thingy?
Yep, on Michael's thing.
can I suggest that we instead make that option 4 from Al's, which is the same thing?
Yeah.
Well, I like your chart, Michael, so I'm going to say it includes
Just don't want
the
the
elementary
opposite.
kindergarten teacher, 2 Mandarin teachers, 2 middle school custodians, the K-4 math science specialist, the MTSS and writing intervention tutors, 2 of them, and the DEIJ coordinator at 100%.
And then we'd use 900K in reserve funds, right?
If we are doing both at once.
That's option 4.
So we have a motion from UC for option C to include full year funding of the DEIJ coordinator position.
I'll second.
We have a second from Dan. Any discussion?
I'll start. This is a tough one, guys. I acknowledge that. I just want to lead off with that. You know, this has been, you've said it many times, Al, this has been one of the most difficult budgets, if not the most difficult budget that I've dealt with in my time on the board. To think of the DEIJ position not starting until January of next year, over a year from now, troubles me a lot. I take your point, Al, that there's more work to be done, and yours, Tom. I think we have sufficient time to do that before September, and even before, you know, the spring normal hiring posting period. And that brings up another concern, is that, you know, hiring mid-year is logistically complicated in education, and it's not to say that it's not doable, and that, you know, I also acknowledge this is a unique position, so it might not be the traditional education position. However, I want us to think back to the conversations we had when what's known as the divisive concepts rider, so to speak, passed as part of the House budget, the state budget. You know, we all discussed our concern and acted on our concern for our teachers, our educators, our district in general, when we decided to write the letter in support of our teachers. To me, this is the next step in the progression of that support. You know, putting the district's money, unfortunately, investing the district's money where we've said we want it to be. You know, I feel like there's so much going on now. It's difficult at our level to fully appreciate how much of a burden it's already been on our teachers, who have essentially done this work on a volunteer basis for us to this point. You know, I want to invest in the work they've done and build on it and alleviate the burden that they've carried so far as quickly as we can. And I think this does that. So that's why I hope we support it. And, you know, and I also, in the same breath, acknowledge all the concerns that have been raised in doing this, potentially. I share those concerns, but at the end, ultimately, I've come to the conclusion that this is the right way to go with this position, because this position is sort of the biggest item at issue here.
Thank you for articulating that better than I could have. I struggled with that last vote more than I have almost anything else that we have voted on. And really, the things that you articulated, Dan, are the things that made the difference for me too. I think that the RSA 193, that HB2 language, is something that we need to provide support for our teachers and staff on. And I also have said before that I find it particularly compelling when we hear from students and teachers, but especially students, honestly. And we've had very very eloquent and passionate testimony from several students over the course of this discussion about the value of this position from their perspective. So I'll support this.
I had a question about the consequences for the drawing from our reserve funds. Now, this would draw 900,000, right? Okay. And when we talked before, we talked to say 900,000 is a worst case scenario. And I know this is becoming really speculative, but I mean, what would a middle level scenario be? I mean, 900,000 would be the absolute worst that could happen, or pretty much we're thinking, right?
So I think like the best case scenario is like the health trust. I think it's, what is it?
So I mean, if you said, okay, this is like, if you have like, you know, Goldilocks, you know, too hard, too soft, and in the middle, you know?
So, yeah, this is the worst case, but as Al said, if the health trust money comes in at less, we'll have that money.
At less than 4.5, right?
And then the fund balance is a very conservative number. I anticipate it'll be larger. What I'm going on is what I know is more than likely from the premium holiday or the refund from health trust.
Yeah, that's right.
So
Okay.
that's going to help offset that too.
So, I mean,
That would be anticipating that we have no fund balance other than the surplus from health trust, which we always have surplus, we always have fund balance.
so I mean, just a ballpark number, is that?
You mean other than 900?
Yeah, I mean, if you had to be a betting person and you had to bet that, what would you bet that it would be?
I would say maybe 400.
What?
400 would be what we would take.
So
if we could
it could be as low as 400
opposed to 900.
as opposed to 900?
Right.
You think that's a reasonable possibility?
That's a reasonable possibility.
Yeah, I was like, and I actually am a betting man, but I would like, so I would say, I mean, again, in my mind, what I'm thinking is that we bought ourselves, we didn't use $500,000 last year when we thought we were going to have to use $500,000. We bought ourselves a year to kind of a little move forward through COVID.
Yeah.
And now we're having to use the 500,000 again. I mean, again, in the spring, you won't actually make this decision until the fall, but in the spring, you're going to have to be a little, you know, careful with your money. But I think it's really reasonable to shoot that it would be really 500,000. So that's my best guess.
This also takes into account a conservative assumption with regards to high school tuition students.
Yeah, it's you know, where before we had the optimistic, this is a really conservative. So if we had 50 students come in from Barrington, that would really change this. Yeah, okay. That's reassuring. I hadn't quite realized that there's that much of a variability that could happen. So to hear a number like that makes me more confident that this could not just devastate our reserves.
And we do have, again, when we're projecting, it's actually projecting to fiscal 23, so we're really throwing it out there. But again, I think, you know, I think all of us in the finance, when we finally had come up with 900,000 reserve funds, it was kind of an eye-popping number. But it isn't, I don't think it's as bad as it looks.
Okay. That's good to know. I'm glad I asked.
Other discussion? All those in favor of adopting option C? 6 in favor. All opposed? 1 opposed. So option C. And now we need to, I think we need to clarify, I think maybe the simplest thing to do would be to say, to vote to adopt the $900,000 to come out of reserve funds. Is that a reasonable way to, and where that would land us is essentially with the same numbers that were in the same sheet that we looked at that Sue gave us last Thursday.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay. So.
Can I just ask a question?
Sure.
On your sheet, Michael, are we essentially looking at option 4 on the revenue side?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. So, and the difference between that and what Al had outlined really is when Jim presented the proposed cuts at the workshop, he also was looking at a reduced salary allocation for this position. And when I did my worksheet, I believe I used the full amount that was on
130
on here. Yeah,
we
the 130.
cut it to 120, which is always, and then you're kicking it back up to 130?
Again, I was just taking numbers off of this page.
No, I hear you.
Well, I think that's a good number because of insurance.
Because of insurance. So if we went to option 4 on the second page of my document, that's the cuts that were outlined. To include that full amount, including insurance, we'd need a little bit more in savings, and so I propose to take that out of the communications budget, and this gets us a little bit more than we need, so we could reduce that a little bit, but I'm comfortable taking a little bit out of our $50,000 we have allocated for communications based on not having a defined direction there, and also knowing that we have tapped into contracted services in that area in the past. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
But,
absolutely.
So you want a motion on that, Mike?
so what would be the clearest way for you, Sue? Would you like us to vote on a?
So what you're really doing is you're just really agreeing on a budget that you're going to present at your public hearing. You really don't adopt your budget until after the public hearing.
Right.
So you just have to make that decision so we can prepare all those documents for your public hearing.
So.
This is the budget you want to move forward with.
Right, so I'm going to move forward with the budgetary numbers that were presented by Sue at the November 18th workshop, which is a Fund 10 of $50,668,275. Well, that's what I'll move.
So just so you know too, though, you have one more contract to settle and that number might change a little bit. So when you get the final numbers on the ORPAS, that might change your numbers a little bit for the warrant, right?
But that's not Fund 10.
No, that's not Fund 10, but I
Okay.
just want to make sure you're aware of that. That's the only thing that will change what you present at the public hearing.
Okay.
Right?
So,
Yeah, but we should know that number for sure by the next meeting.
all right. So my motion is to adopt to present at the public hearing the budget as outlined on the budget and tax impact revised proposal that was presented on November 18th with a Fund 10 value of $50,668,275.
Michael, would you mind if you say move forward to the public hearing rather than adopt, because it implies you'll adopt the budget?
Mike.
Yeah, you're not talking into your mic, but I heard you. So I will adjust my motion, since it hasn't been seconded yet, to move to public hearing, the budget hearing, with the budget and tax impact numbers that were presented by the business administrator at the November 18th workshop, which includes a Fund 10 value of $50,668,275.
I'll second.
And a second from Al. Any further discussion? All those in favor? 7 in favor. The numbers are approved, or forwarded to the public hearing.
Forwarded to the hearing.
Move to go to.
Approved for forwarding.
All right. I have shuffled my papers enough that I have lost my agenda. All right, so Sue, that brings us to the default budget. Do we actually need to approve the default budget, or is this informational at this point?
Yeah, you do, because that needs to be presented at public hearing. So yes, you do need to approve this one. Because I think it says right on the front page.
Sue, do you mind reading it into the record?
It just said, default budget as used in this subdivision means, it's somewhere it says, I'm just looking for that.
Okay.
When it has to be done.
No, I guess I'm wrong. But yes, you do, because this will no longer be a draft when you present it at your public hearing.
So would we have, just to ask that, so would we have to do it this meeting, or could it be next meeting when you have the complete information? Will we be, I'm trying to wonder, will we be done with the last warrant?
The default budget won't change based on that.
No, that won't change. That won't change.
Because it's a warrant
Default will not change.
Okay, you're right.
It just, this number will go on the warrant article.
Never mind.
So So this default budget is $411,784 less than what we just discussed for proposed budget. One interesting thing about this year is that amount is not so much due to things that we added into the next year's budget as it is savings from benefit elections and retirement incentive position changes over time, more than things that we added. So, any discussion on the? I would invite a motion to move the fiscal year 23 default budget forward to the budget hearing. Motion from Brian.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second from Denise. Any discussion? All those in favor? 7 in favor. The default budget is forwarded to the hearing.
Thank you.
And then the warrant articles, those don't need to be acted on yet because they're not,
No.
we still have a.
Right, correct. We'll put those numbers in there. It's actually just gone to the attorney for approval, and then we'll bring it back at your next meeting.
So the warrant articles are for information. Does anybody have any questions about the warrant articles for Sue? I think this is the same as what we saw at the November 18th workshop. All right.
Okay.
That concludes our work on the budget for tonight.
Thank you.
Denise, we're up to policies.
Okay, so we have policies. Shall we, I don't know if people want to, perhaps we should take it out and do individually. So starting with BHE, which is school board use of email. I don't know if this is for first read, if people had additional changes they wanted to make to the policy. Okay.
Do you want to take them?
What's that?
Do you want to take them together, or?
I'm fine, I just didn't know if we needed to have a bigger discussion. Otherwise, I'll just make a motion to adopt for first read, policy BHE, school board use of emails, IB, academic freedom, and GBI, staff participation in political activities.
So we have a motion from Denise to approve those policies for first read.
Second.
We have a second from Tom. Any discussion?
What is the history of the changes to the academic freedom policy? I like the direction it's taking. I'm just curious why it was looked at and expanded.
I think we were just trying to bring it up to date. You see, there's no significant change other than how we put the language together. It's a pretty unique policy for public schools, but it's something that our district has had for generations.
When we added the last paragraph is directly in response to what's going on right now with the confusion about what can be taught.
All right. So the motion is to adopt BHE, IB, and GBI for first read. All those in favor? 7 in favor. Those policies are approved for first read. Any committee updates?
I have one. So it was like last night, and I didn't write anything up because it was last night. So sustainability met last night. It was Maggie Morrison's really last meeting. She has had what I would call an impossible, ironically enough, an unsustainable job. It's been an impossible job to try to have a person come in from the outside, try to do a really huge committee that does operational side and curricular side. And actually having lived through it, seeing it go from green teams like in each school to consolidating to one person to now moving back to teachers that are in the building to trying to figure out where we're moving forward. So I think she did a great job threading the needle. I think her last work where she really tried to work with stakeholders in all of the communities and with UNH to try to build a regional composting collective was outstanding. And so at last night's meeting, the beginning portion was on the 10/21 school board meeting. We had the sustainability management plan was brought forward by the intern. and she presented it. And so last night, I came in late, but there was a great deal of discussion about the committee approving that rough draft to go forward. And I think in my discussion, I had some concerns about the rough draft and hope that they would be revised. Two of the big ones were exactly as I talked about. We're in a time of like really seismic shift that's occurring. We're going from a centralized person to like decentralizing again, trying to handle these two really difficult separate issues of operational and curricular. How do they fit together? And so I think, you know, and if you look in the management plan, it talks about teachers, and I can't remember what the actual term was, teachers, something about specialty where they're kind of focused in. That was the first priority. And if we couldn't do that, then we'd use a consultant. And then there was also the idea of like a full-time coordinator for sustainability. So I think there's a lot of work to be done still there to figure out exactly what the structure of this looks like. I think also it's a real challenge. The committee itself only meets quarterly, and I am hard-pressed to think of any committee that works quarterly accomplishing much. There needs to be more working groups, one that's working on the curricular portion of it. How are we doing a professional development with staffing? How does that then filter into the classrooms, and what does that look like? That's one issue. The second really is on the operational side, what are the standards that we're really looking at trying to achieve, whether they be, you know, greenhouse gas emissions or any of that, and how do we meet them? So I think there's a lot of work to be done in this committee to be reformulated. The idea really was trying to get some kind of a working group working and to come forward more in probably April with an idea of where we're going forward. So I think it's an interesting discussion to be continued.
If I could just, it was my first time observing the committee, and I was very impressed with the level of engagement by administrators and really sort of owning some of the pieces there. So this specific next step of taking that laundry list of good to do suggestions and turning them into priorities and action plans in transportation, in nutrition, in facilities. It's not like people are twiddling their thumbs between quarters. There's a lot of work being done, particularly at the administrative level in that. And yes, it's absolutely true that the staffing and sustainability of that piece will be a question, but overall I think the plan itself was, there's still a lot of excitement around the idea of the cultural shift and continuing to spread ideas of sustainability in the classroom, among the staff, and it's just so the draft being accepted by the committee, and the plan to fine-tune it a bit and bring it to the board for future discussion. It's really exciting.
Michael, with the board's authorization, I'd like to compose a letter of appreciation to Maggie. She has done this work for nearly a decade. It was the very first budget that Tom, Al, and I dealt with where the audience spoke to putting the money into the budget over and above what the board had approved for that particular year. And she has been, the rock of the committee in terms of consistency, and her work ethic and her communication skills with Sue and I just has been phenomenal. I think she just deserves high praise from this body. I would need a motion if I'm going to write on your behalf.
You'd like a motion?
Yes, please.
Motion. Well, Al, you should do it.
I'll make a motion that we write a letter of appreciation to Maggie.
Good.
We have a motion from Al.
Second.
Second from UC. Discussion? All those in favor? 7 in favor.
Thank you very much. It's a small gift of appreciation. Is just worth. She's just worth it.
Other committee updates?
So policy committee, at our next policy committee meeting, which is next week, we will be looking at GICD, which pertains to school discipline, and this is in response to law change. So we'll be looking at that and bringing that forward.
Significant law changes, so our policy will it'll probably take us a couple of meetings to get to a draft.
I mentioned the negotiation committee also met yesterday, and we're not done. We're meeting again next week to be continued.
So in that respect, I had originally intended that we would have a non-meeting afterwards to discuss those outcomes, but that seems like it's not necessary tonight.
Yeah, we're not done.
Yep, okay. Other committee updates? Public comment? No public comment? You can see our future meeting dates here, December 15th. The Manifest Committee is asked to stop in the last week of December at the SAU office, and then our next regular board meeting, first regular board meeting of 2022 is January 5th. And with that.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes. Motion from Tom.
Move to adjourn?
Second from Brian. All those in favor? 7 in favor. We are adjourned.